Let's see, am I on? I was debating to do a little update on the shooting at the concert in Vegas, but I'll have George say hi. That's it.
Hey, hi.
That's George and Diane. But I told them I want to do a news update, so I'm going to walk a little bit. I was debating to talk about the shooting because one of the things sometimes that the media has done in the past is they want to jump the gun and be the first one to get the scoop. And the mainstream media has done that often. But in order for me to do this, I have to do it before we know what the official motive was, if there was any. Okay? It has to be done before the mainstream media will report on it. I made 3 videos yesterday, and they were just little rollout videos, not the teaching post that I posted this morning. The first one was called A Panic in Prince. Now look, I review all those videos as I upload them, and I can remember some things. I remember what I talked about. I mentioned on the first video, I talked about death. Simply, those of you that watched the one called Panic in Prince, I talked about death, and I said, I have news for you, we're all going to die. In the generic sense that we all die. Then later in the day at my daughter's house, I actually did a second video. I forget which one that was titled. If you watch that second video, I also said I got into talking about media critique, and I also said there were times where we had shootings in the country, and that when the shootings were for a particular reason, like the Democrat person who shot Steve Scalise, oftentimes the media is very loath or slow to actually report particular connections that they might not want to be reported. I said that on the second video yesterday, whatever the title of that one was, Media Disgrace. And then on the third video, I just talked about the media again and the San Juan mayor. And then, of course, later that night, we had a shooting, which, as of now, I think there were 58 confirmed dead and over 500 injured. Okay? The man, Paddock. Now, I'm not going to give you anything from just the various. Already, it seems as if maybe somebody put up a fake Facebook page and other reports. But the one report that I can say was credible, though it's unconfirmed, because it either came from Reuters or AP. And it said ISIS claimed that this man Paddock converted to Islam 3 months ago, and he was one of their soldiers. Okay? Either AP or Reuters, they said in their report, it's unconfirmed, but that it did come from the official ISIS site. I've never looked at the ISIS news site or any of that nature, but I would trust Reuters to be correct, at least that ISIS claimed responsibility. Now, I listen to talk radio and talk news, and I only want to go about 5 minutes on this. So I had, on the talk radio at the time I start doing work at the house, it's usually the Glenn Beck show. I really don't like Glenn Beck, but I listen to Glenn Beck, Rush Limbaugh, as well as the most liberal news people as well, which I've mentioned before. So I try to listen to them all. In the first 30 minutes or so, maybe 40 minutes, he had somebody else doing his show, but they were, the whole mindset and the way they were discussing it, they said, oh yes, they picked up on what I just told you, that ISIS claimed responsibility, and they're joking, and they said, oh yeah, they claim responsibility for Hurricane Maria, and they claim they were doing like a mocking thing that yes, they claim responsibility. And they said how ISIS might have a history of just claiming, but I didn't Google how many times has ISIS lied about a particular attack and claimed they were responsible. And then later we, the media in the U.S. and the U.S. government, later we proved them to be false. I can't remember. I don't believe them to have a history of lying. Normally what will turn out later is it would be true that whoever committed a particular act was affiliated in some way with Islam or radical Islam. Normally it would be true, and then our media or our country, government, would then try to debunk other connections. But as a news watcher, I remember a very famous case. It might have been Yemen. This was some years ago. But there was a young girl who, till this day, I cut out her picture and I have it on the little prayer board, and she died. She was a young girl, I forget her name, and she was just trying to help the people. It was either in Iraq, Yemen, but it was in one of the countries where radical Islam and things are going on. And that girl was kidnapped and forced to be the wife of either an Al-Qaeda leader or an ISIS leader, I forget. Well, that was terrible. They kidnapped her and made her become the wife of one of the terrorist leaders. And then in one of our bombings that we did, not intentionally to kill that girl, but we hit a camp in one of the countries, and that group, Al-Qaeda or ISIS, through the official channels, notified the U.S. government, U.S. military. They said, you hit one of the places where that girl was staying and you killed her. Now, immediately, when the Islamic group said that, our media and our government came out and angrily denied it, and angrily said they have a history of lying about affiliations and so forth. But just as a news watcher, I've not seen them use propaganda in that way. But we were adamant. And as the months passed, I read all the news sites, and what ISIS or Al-Qaeda said was exactly true. That we did hit in one of the raids and kill that girl. Then, 6-8 months later, our official response by our media and our government was still, they lie so often, they lie and I thought, I don't remember them to lie about that. In their radicalism, I guess they felt that when they put out a statement, they're not going to lie about it. And then our final response about that girl being killed by our own fighters, accidentally, was, well, yes, we kind of finally admitted a year later and said, but it still was their fault. And look, of course it was their fault. But the point I was just making, in the mix of all that goes on in these wars, when they made the statement to our government that, look, you killed the girl that we kidnapped. We not only didn't want to believe it, but we said, how dare they lie? And later, we found out they didn't lie. So as of this point, and I had to mention it now before we know what the motive was, because there's a couple of things online, and I do look at all the sites, CNN, Fox, Drudge Report. I used to not look at Breitbart, but I look at both the liberal, Huffington Post, and conservative, and normally if you see, but none of them are reporting what I mentioned, that ISIS has claimed responsibility, except that one AP or Reuters report that said they claimed it. So I only say that to say this. I did mention yesterday in the rollout, I said, and that's another area where we often see manipulation. We had the famous case. I was watching the news one day at my daughter's house, where I was yesterday, after I did a teaching. This was a year or so ago. And as I was watching the news, which often upsets me, it was the time where there were police shootings. We had one here in Texas, tragic. Well, then there was another shooting, and it was an officer. I forget exactly which case this was. And as they were reporting it, it was either MSNBC or CNN. But I think it was MSNBC. And they were kind of connecting the shooter of the officer as possibly part of a white, conservative, Christian fundamentalist background, because in the past he might have had some connection. But as they kept reporting, I noticed they refused to give the race of the man. And normally they will say a white officer has been shot or whatever, which they said the officer happened to be white. But I thought, why are they not saying the race? And why are they going on? This went on for a few hours of coverage, saying we think he might have had connections, sort of like the white Christian Southern type connections. And finally, I forget if I clicked to one of the other ones. And of course, the man was black. And the media was not reporting that he was a black man that killed a white officer, which later it showed his motive was the anger. It's sort of like a Black Lives Matter radical. Okay, I wouldn't say a Black Lives Matter. They don't approve any of that. But he became radicalized and flipped. But the media went on with their narrative. That one particular show. You also had the military man, I think it was the Air Force case out of Texas. Was it Nadia Hassan? But he was a military man. He was Muslim, and he shot people at the base here. It might have been San Antonio. It's a famous case. It's happened during the Obama administration. Once again, the media, and I think they might have still to this day officially called it workplace violence, because later they found out indeed he was radical. He was Islamist, and I think he was one of those cases where he shot Allah Akbar when he killed people on the base and shot them. But the media went on for a very long time. And yet other things, like what I mentioned on the video yesterday, that when you have a Sarah Palin or anybody that even makes a statement like, let's target a person, meaning like in a political campaign, they went on for weeks in saying that statement of Sarah Palin radicalized various people. So I just found it interesting. Not that this is the story today, and what seems to be happening, this man, he lived there in a community center there in Vegas, Del Webb. They actually do advertisements for community. He seemed to be a high-stakes gambler, his brother said. The woman that was his living girlfriend, it's possible, there's some things about the names and all that, it's possible that the man somehow did convert to Islam. And if it happened recently, and he had any influence with any of the radical, that might be it. Now, I'm not saying it's it, and I'm saying it might be it. But the media did go out of their way in more than one occasion. If links to a particular shooting were what they would not really want, if it was a liberal person or a Democrat, I guarantee you that if you had a man like the man who shot the Congressman Steve Scalise, who was an avowed Democrat, liberal, a Trump hater, targeting Republicans, the media played that down, and still some say there was no connection and so forth. But yet they make connections that are even, because that's how they do these things. That's how they do it. They, like I just told you, they try to say a black shooter of a white officer. They didn't even get his race for the first couple of hours on that particular media coverage. And actually said he might be sort of like a conservative white radical. They didn't use the term white, but that's what they were associating with. Southern Texas Republic they were associating with. And then it later came out, no, he was very upset about the whole race issue in the country. It was quite obvious. You didn't have to study a lot. So we pray for the people. We don't want to politicize this. But if it's possible that what ISIS put out on their official page, which was he converted 3 months ago and he was one of their soldiers, if that's possible, then that's it. Then you see the motive. Doesn't take a whole lot. The man's life, he was a high-stakes gambler, like a real estate investor, and his family are shocked and all. So I just wanted to share that because yesterday on the videos I actually discussed that one particular issue, and it just winds up that today we're dealing with something like that. Okay? We'll pray for the families of the victims, pray for all of this. Okay? God bless everybody.